know that
requirement of the marriage?
No, so no, that's a good follow-up. No one has ever insisted that couples have to have children to be married. It's not that every marriage has a child, it's that every child has a mom and a dad. And that marriage tries to maximize the likelihood that that child will be raised by their mom and dad.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about what if it was a negative father figure and how that might affect children and how might...
I mean, so obviously if the spouses aren't actually loving each other, they aren't loving their kids, if they're abusing one another or the children, then marriage isn't going to have some of the benefits that it could. But even that said, when the social scientists do this, and they control for various factors, they'll control for income, they'll control for education, but even with the handful of fathers who aren't good fathers, we still see that marriage has these benefits on average and for the most part. But that's not to deny that any given marriage, any given father, might actually be doing grave harm both to his spouse and to his children, simply by not loving.
It seemed that the crux of your argument about why the state's interested in marriage is that because children deserve both a mother and a father, and that this is the ideal. And I guess my question is, do we have any scientific evidence about that? You brought up about parents without or families without a father, but that could just as easily be explained by just the lack of two loving adults being together.
We now have about 40 or 50 years of robust social science showing the importance of a married mother and father for children. And what this 40 or 50-year tradition of social science has looked at is they compared the married biological mother-father intact family to several alternatives, including single parenting, including cohabitation, including divorce, and including divorce with remarriage. And only recently have they started looking at same-sex couples. So let me first speak just to those first alternatives that we have about 40 or 50 years of robust social science on. So this is the married, intact, biological mother-father family compared to single parenting, divorce, divorce and remarriage, and cohabitation. On more or less every factor that they could measure, the child in the married, biological mother-father family has an advantage over a child in any of the alternatives, over and over and over again, with large, random, representative samples that were also longitudinal, so they tracked the same child throughout time. The results came back just like this. So much so that we actually saw liberal scholars willing to change their mind on this. Even divorce and remarriage has no difference compared to just divorce. So that gets to your question about, is it the two incomes or the two people there? Even when you get the second income back in the family through divorce and remarriage, it doesn't seem to make a difference. And so then the question is, why? And so one of the things that this social scientist saw is that there are three mechanisms that seem to explain why marriage matters. It's biology, it's gender, and it's stability. So that was more or less a consensus of social science up until about a decade ago. And then we got a series of social science studies that claimed that there were no differences with same-sex parenting and with married moms and dads. And this was interesting because it actually showed that lesbians were the best parents of all, and that a relationship with two mothers raising a child produced outcomes for children that were even better than children who were being raised by their mothers and fathers. And so this set off alarm bells for some social scientists. They said this doesn't pass the sniff test. So they looked into these studies, and not a single one of them used large or even random samples. And so if you don't have a random sample to begin with, you can draw exactly nothing as a conclusion about the population as a whole. So then I'll say that we've now had 3 studies that have used large, random, representative samples. 2 of those came to the conclusion that there are differences. All of this is to say, to the question about scientific evidence, when it comes to same-sex parenting, we know very little, because it's a relatively new phenomenon in human existence, but there's very little reason to think that the same-sex parenting relationship wouldn't follow the general pattern of what we know from 50 years of good, robust social science, that biology matters, gender matters, and stability matters.
But it seems that if two men or 2 women who are married and love each other faithfully, they have something that those other things lack, and that maybe that's the thing. And
yeah, so I mean that's a possibility. So it could be the case that The reason that cohabitation and divorce and remarriage have these poor outcomes is because they're not stable, but that same-sex relationships, if they were stable, wouldn't have those problems. I'm open to that being a possibility. It still seems that that wouldn't address the biological connection or the gender connection.
Thank you for your talk, Ryan. Often I hear the argument about interracial marriage brought up, saying that these same exact arguments were made, saying interracial marriage is dangerous for the children, for society. So how do you suggest we best show that?
So in America, we had slavery. It was based, classified on race. And in order to perpetuate a class of human beings that were being subjugated as slaves, you had to keep the races apart. And so they redefined marriage to make it based on race in a way that marriage had never been understood to be, precisely so that they could avoid the creation of interracial children that would then make a race-based slavery more difficult. So if you go back to the first section of my talk this morning, when I was going through what is marriage, you never heard skin color or ethnicity or race enter into it, because it has nothing to do with what marriage is. So the bans on interracial marriage were unjust precisely because of what marriage is. But that's why defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman is just precisely because of what marriage is.
There's this very much like contractual obligation to another person in this permanence of marriage. And one of the many reasons that people do get married, because they say to each other that they're going to be together for life, right? And thus, when you go into marriage, you go into these laws that protect you and serve you as somebody who's going through life as a permanent couple. And
but the question that I asked you is, explain to me that basic argument you just gave. Why does it have to be only between two people in a sexually exclusive relationship and only in a permanent relationship? Because you could get the economies of scales for the 5-year commitment. So I mean, I could have a contract from the government in which we pledge to be with each other, just the two of us and exclusively, but for 5 years, and we can get many of the same economic benefits that you talked about, and we could co-inherit property, and we could visit each other in the hospital. So the question that I asked was, explain to me why it would be a union of two and only two in an exclusive union and a permanent communion that the government cares about once you get rid of the male-female aspect. And so I haven't heard that yet. It seems to me that you're saying that the government has an interest in contract law.
Yeah, it does.
And contracts can come in as many different sizes and shapes as consent comes in. So it sounds to me that you're actually arguing for the abolishment of marriage. And I think that's the logical conclusion of getting rid of the male-female aspect. That if you don't think marriage is about uniting male and female, husband and wife, mother and father, then you don't really think marriage exists. You think it's just contract law. And
so my question is, why should I not have the right to file a joint tax return? Why should I pay more taxes than a straight couple simply because I'm a minority? How is that not discrimination?
Sure, no. All right, so then you think that we should have same-sex marriage for same-sex couples, but would you also extend marriage equality rights to the throuple?
So my question really is, why should I, as a gay man, be denied the same right to file a joint tax return with my potential husband that a straight couple
And
has?
I want to play out what principle you're acting on, because I would hope that you're not just doing special pleading, that you want protection for your rights but not for all Americans' rights. So I would hope that you wouldn't be saying that you want special tax treatment but I don't care about the throuples. So I want to see what principle you're acting on, and does the principle that you're hoping to vindicate to protect your rights also extend to protect the rights of the throuple?
Sure, so I'm acting on civil rights, and so the rights that are applicable to a male and female couple are applicable to a male and male couple. And that's my question. How is that not discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation?
Right, so part of the answer is that because the same-sex couple isn't a marriage, and so that we want marriage equality to treat all marital relationships in the same way. And given the understanding I've presented of what marriage is, same-sex relationship isn't marital. But I'm trying to ask you about the equal protection argument you're making. Would it apply to all consenting adult romantic relationships? So why would you want the same-sex couple to file jointly for taxes, but not the same-sex throuple or the opposite-sex quartet?
Sure, I appreciate that, and that's not I'm sorry, but that's not actually my question. My question is, why should I be denied the right to file?
Then I'll answer your question. The reason that you should not have the option of filing a joint tax return is because you can't get married. Given what marriage is,
California, I can get married.
You can be issued a marriage license in the state of California, but you can't actually get married. And I'm sorry to say it that way, but given what marriage is, a union of sexually complementary. And it's not discrimination because everyone is equally eligible for entering into the marital relationship, where you understand marriage as a union of sexually complementary spouses, a permanent exclusive union of man and woman, husband and wife, mother and father. If you're not interested in entering into that sort of a union, you're not being discriminated against. What you're asking us to do is to redefine marriage to include the adult relationship of your choice. And the adult relationship of your choice happens to be a same-sex couple. There are other adults who want to have marriage redefined to include the relationship of their choice, which may be the same-sex throuple or the opposite-sex quartet. And so what I'm asking you in response is, what principle are you appealing to when you say this is discrimination to vindicate your rights but not their rights? Because it seems to me that your position ultimately leads to simply the dissolvement of the marital union.
Just heard you do not have the right to get married. So if you could tell me why I don't have the right to get married, that
It's not that you don't have a right to get married, it's that you aren't seeking out marriage. Marriage is by nature a union of sexually complementary spouses, a union of man and woman, husband and wife, mother and father. And just based upon what you've said about yourself, it doesn't sound like you're interested in forming that sort of a union. It sounds like you're interested in forming a union with another man, and that's not a marriage. So that's why I don't think the law should treat the relationship that you want to form as a marriage.
But to make your argument complete, I mean, you could say fatherhood is so good, so why not have two of them? Right. So you have to explain why, it's so important to have a mother as well. So
let's suppose quantitatively, we have a number of people who want to redefine marriage, and so it becomes the case that it will be redefined. How would we adjust? How do we adjust and prepare and solve the problems that
we don't know as much from kind of a robust social science perspective about mothering, partly because we don't have very many instances of children growing up without mothers. So what I mentioned earlier is that whenever a child is born, a mother is close by, and that most of the instances of single parenting are actually single mothering. So we know much more about what it's like to grow up without a father, because unfortunately there are a huge portion of the American population in that situation. And so the scientists have been able to study that particular situation with greater delicacy than mothering. But for the other question, I'll answer this in two ways. One is that I think to a certain extent, whatever happens in law and policy, we as free citizens will always be capable of living out the truth about marriage in our own lives. And so I think to a certain extent, the best defense of marriage are healthy, happy marriages. And the best way of protecting the rights of children is by being a good parent, a good mother, or a good father to your own children. And the last thing I'll say is, if we get a string of bad court rulings, if the law and the politics go against us, I think here we just take a lesson from the pro-life movement. At 1973, public opinion was rapidly shifting against pro-lifers. At one point, it was 67% pro-choice, 33% pro-life. You had all of the elites saying that pro-lifers were on the wrong side of history. But over the past 40 years, all of that work that has been done with the pro-life movement, your generation's now more pro-life than your parents' generation. And a majority of Americans now support the right to life for the unborn. And so the same thing that happened 40 years ago with the right to life movement would need to happen politically on the marriage issue. And so it's that twin factor of cultural efforts and political efforts. That's what we have to do on the marriage issue. Thank you.